This is option 2. Remember, you can do this or option 1 and still get full credit. So in this, for option 2, we are going to be doing the SQL to be able to help us to determine where the costs of resources are going, specifically as distributed between product categories and the different machines that they're processed through. So our end result is we are going to be creating something that looks like this, a Marimekko chart. Now, if you do a Marimekko chart, you will get the extra credit. However, you can turn in a table that looks like this, just like the one you did, just like the one for option 1, and still get full credit. If you do go the additional mile and do the Marimekko chart, you'll get the extra credit points. So what we're going to do is we want to determine what the costs of different parts. We want to look at the flow of costs, and we want to see how those are distributed over the different part categories, so we know which part categories are costing us the most. And we want to just get an idea of what machine or what capital equipment is processing the most costs. So where could we and that might give us insight later into decisions we want to make. Um, so starting off by looking at this, before we will get into any of the SQL, let's first determine what type of table we are going to need to be able to create. So I'm going to open up an Excel sheet just so we can map out what we would want our SQL to look like. So if we go back to this chart that we have over here, we're going to need to have machines, and then we are going to need to have our different products. So we're going to have our machines 1, 2, 3. We'll have it over here, and then just our different, I'm sorry, this is not products, this is part categories. So we'll have category 1, category 2, category 3, and so forth, and then each one of these is going to have a value in it. So that's the end table that we want to get. In order to get that, we will need to have a I'll just add the M's in here. To get there, we'll need to have one column that has the category, one column that has the machine, and then some kind of ID column. Since we are going to be looking at the quantity, we want to see the quantity of products that are flown through. We ultimately, actually, I'm back here. We want to get the total cost. We want to get the total cost for each of these. And then we want each one of these to be a unique part. So each row is going to be a unique part. Then we're going to have a column that says what category it is. And then we're going to have a column saying what machine it gets processed through. And then we're going to have a column that tells us our total cost, which is going to be equal to the quantity of that part produced times the cost of that part produced. So ultimately, once we get to this table, we can pivot it into that table and then make our graph. So let's open up our database schema to see how we can go about doing this. Now we see here we have category that's in the part table, so we'll need to get that. Then we want the machine. For right now, we'll just stick with capital equipment ID, so we don't necessarily have to do this extra join, but we'll have to get to the operations table. That gives us 2 of our columns. Then we want costs, which is also on parts, and we want to multiply that by the quantity, which will be the batch size, would give us the quantity. The problem is to get from here to here, we have to first join on to the product parts table and then join on to the products table. And then from products, then we can get all this other information. So how this is going to work is we want to look at we want to get for each part, we want to get the product that each part is associated with. So we'll have we'll connect these two tables onto each other. So we'll get one column that has the product ID, another column that has the part ID, and we will have rows for each part, each possible combination of parts and products. Once we get that, all the possible combinations for all the parts and products, we will then join that onto the operations table via product ID, and that will tell us what is the batch size or how many of those products that are produced. Then we can go and that would tell us the quantity of each of the products. So let's say that I have a product, a cell phone, and the cell phone has a part that has a battery, it has a case and a screen. So, and this produces 2 cell phones in this batch that would connect onto the product cell phone. So cell phone would have a batch size of 3. And then once we connect it onto the parts, we would have 3 rows, which would be product. I'm sorry. Or let me do this demonstration here. Let's say we have cell phone. We'll have our product. And this will be cell phone. And then we know the batch size for that specific operation is to produce 2 cell phones. And then we have over here, we know that product and part, we have cell phone, we'll have a battery, it has a case and a screen. So if we so this is first joining on the operations to the product table, then we join the product table on to the product parts table. What this will turn into is we would ultimately just take batch and add it there. Because if we want to make us 2 cell phones, we're going to need 2 batteries, 2 cases, and 2 screens. And then we would have our parts table, which would have the part and the cost on it. And we should also be able to get from operations, we know what machine it is. So we'll just say this is machine 1. And we would join that onto this table with batch. So we know all these are in machine 1. We know the cost for this. We'll just say like maybe a battery is $50. This case is $20. And then the screen is $30. And so then if we join this on where match these parts up over here, oops. Just place this over here. Then we could calculate what the total cost would be by just multiplying these two together, and that will get us the cost for each of the parts. Then once we have this, we get a table that looks like, we'll end up getting a table that looks like this. And then I can go ahead and pivot that table. And once we pivot that table, that would give us what our total cost would be. Well, that's what we're doing on a really simplified way. So in order to do that, we're going to need to connect the operations table onto the product table, which will connect onto the product parts table. That will then connect onto the parts table. So let's open up the Beaver or whatever your equivalent SQL engine is and start scripting. Now first, I want to establish a couple things. So we know that the final table is going to be how many parts is in, should be the same number of how many parts are in the parts table. So if I do this, if I use a count function, I run that, I see that there's 147 different rows in the parts table. And this is important because moving forward, I want to make sure that my final table will have 147 rows in it. If it does not have 147 rows, that means I did something wrong with my joining. But let's first start with, this is a pretty simple join that we want to do, where we're going to get the different products that go with the different parts. So I will want to, I'm just going to select everything from parts, and I'm going to call this PS. And then want to left join onto product parts. And I'll do that where on ps.id is equal to product parts dot part ID. So I'm getting my parts ID and I'm joining it onto the product parts ID. And what this does is it gets me a product part. It gives me my product ID. And you can see that we're still at 147 different, we're still at 147 rows, so we are still good. So that's one part of the equation. The next thing that we are going to want to do is figure out how we can then get this in a position where we can get it to be where we can end up joining it on with these other tables. So the way we're going to do that is we can first just explore the operations table. We can go ahead and explore that, and here are our operations that we've had so far. So I want to get the batch sizes of these. And so what I'm going to do is I can go ahead and I want to group by. I want to aggregate these together. So I'm going to group by. The two things that we want to keep separate are the capital equipment. We want to know what capital equipment is being used, and then we also want to know the product. So I'm going first group by product ID and then by capital equipment. And then I'm going to do the average batch size Oops, let me make sure that I get these up here as well. Or actually, sorry, I'm going to want to sum the batch sizes all together. I want to add up all the quantities for each of the products. So I'm going to sum these together, and that gets me for each product, I can see the total quantity that was produced. I can also see which capital equipment it was used to produce that certain product. So now that I have this table, I can then join it onto this table. And what that'll allow me to do is it will then allow me to pair up my parts can be paired up with the product IDs, and that will then allow me to get the capital equipment that is used for that part, and then also it'll allow me to get the quantity of that part that is being produced. So I am going to use a subquery to do this. I'm going to turn this into a subquery. And then I am just going to call it operations OT for operations table. I'm going to use that alias. And I'm going to do another left join onto this table. And I'm going to do that on ot.product ID, and where that is equal to product parts dot product ID. And let's see, I do that. And I get the category column, which I wanted. I get the cost column, which I wanted. I get the capital equipment column that I wanted. And I get the batch column, which I wanted. Let's just call the batch column quant for right now. We'll get back. And if I do my count function on here, I can see that I still have 147 different rows, which keeps it where I want it to do, so I know I did my work correctly. So let's just choose the columns we want to get, which is categories, costs, then I'll also want, actually I want to keep, want parts ID, that'll be important, so that we keep the same row number. Costs, I want capital equipment. OT got. Or we can make this, we'll just copy this. We'll give it an alias up here. Okay, so we got the product ID, the categories, the capital equipment, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take costs times, make this lowercase, quant, and I'll have that as total costs. Run that. And there we go. We have what we need. Now you'll notice now we have everything we need to create the table that we wanted to. However, you notice that we have some null entries for the capital equipment and the total cost. And you may be wondering why that is. Well, Faraday does not produce all of its products. Just because it has a product within its database doesn't mean it's actually the one that produces it. In fact, that's one of the central questions of the case is should they produce some of these products that they don't own. So in part of the case we'll actually be going through and we'll be determining what these numbers are. But for right now, for the analysis that we're currently doing, we don't care about those products because they're outsourced. So I'm going to go ahead and filter those products out, and I can easily do that by adding a where clause. I'm just going to say where capital equipment is not null. And that filters out basically any value where the capital equipment is null. And if the capital equipment is null, that means that we don't actually produce it, we are outsourcing it. And I just want to give a note, when you do perform analysis like this for a company, it's important that you understand how the database is set up and how they store and log data. Every company is different, so you can't make any sweeping assumptions. It's in this case, I would have had to probably have talked to somebody to have learned that, of why there were the null values there. But that is part of the process of doing business intelligence, is working with other departments and working with engineering to figure out how data is stored and how records are being kept with the different ERP platforms that you may be interacting with. And now we have our table. I'm just going to make some changes really quick. So I can change this to machine. And then I'm going to change this to part category. And I'm going to run that. There we go. I'm going to then export this as a CSV file. We'll call it cost analysis. Okay, and here is our cost analysis. And so then I can do machine, I can do part category, and then I can have our total costs. And then maybe I want to do something like, I don't know, percentages for it. And I have this table that I can now work with. And I just want to remind all of you, of course, this table would need more formatting, but it is perfectly acceptable to turn in the project, to turn in this assignment, where I'm just going to create a table like this. I'll paste it in, I can paste these numbers in, and then I'd create something that looks like this. But that's all for this video. If you do want to do the extra credit, I'll be showing you how to take those numbers we just generated and turn it into a Marimekko chart like this.